Hello again, and very welcome to the section about pawn play. I think that pawn play is one of the most interesting areas in chess strategy, but at the same time, one of the most demanding ones. One difficulty, if we compare to the previous subjects that we have been looking at, piece improvement and exchanges, is that pawn play typically needs more time in order to see the benefits of a specific action. Anyway, we already saw several cases of using pawns in the strategical battle. If you remember, at the very beginning of this course, we saw how Hansen against me played the move d5 in order to improve the pawn structure, clearing the d file, ending up with a favorable pawn majority on the queen side. We had saw some other ideas also, for example, in the game where I played with the black pieces against Shaparinov. I used the idea of playing e5 in order to provide my knight with a protected square on d4. We also saw some other ideas, like, for example, Botvinnik used the very same move e5 against Petrosyan in the chapter about the king, but for a different reason, a completely different reason. The move e5 was used by Botvinnik. What Botvinnik wanted to do was to open up the e file and also the long diagonal for his bishop on g7. So you can see that there are actually very many different ways in which we can use our pawns in the strategical battle. I would like to name a few ones because these will provide a foundation of the following chapters in this section. We have gaining space, which is a very important part of strategy in general. Even in the endgame, the benefits of gaining space can be really visible. We also have the creation of weaknesses. We can use our pawns in order to soften up the pawn structure in the enemy camp. We can also use the pawns in order to create a passed pawn. We can mobilize the pawn in a pawn majority. This is a very important idea. We saw it, for example, in the same game when I played against Hansen, that he had a very good pawn majority. We also saw it in the game where Brunel played with the white pieces in the Ruy Lopez exchange variation. If you remember, white had 4 pawns on the king side, and they continued to move those pawns upwards in order to create a passed pawn in the end. We can also use, or we should use, the pawns whenever there are pawn chains on the board. In closed position, it's very important to understand the concept of pawn chains in order to be able to create activity. And finally, I would say one important part of pawn play is dynamics. We talked about this in the beginning. It's a very complex subject. The interpretation of the word dynamics can be various. Anyway, I'm simply referring to the idea of creating something new in the position, use the pawns in some specific way in order to create, let's say, stronghold in the center, open up a file, diagonal, modify the pawn structure to our benefit, and so on. So a lot of things that we will look at in this section about pawn play. Once again, very welcome, and see you in the next chapter.